Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film versus Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host. I'm a filmmaker on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode, I pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on streaming. I pick a favorite film from that topic and battle it out against a guest to decide which film would become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 2. Hello, welcome back, guys, to part 2 of the podcast, where we are talking Denis Villeneuve films 2. And of course, you probably know by now, this is the part of the show where I read out your Instagram responses for your film picks of the last episode. And that last episode was on biopics. And Claire from Why the Flick went with Spencer. Matt from the Matt and Mark movie show went with Man on the Moon. And some podcast called the Revisionist Almanac went with Rocket Man and Walk the Line.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
Cool.
Though I will say, as much as I love Walk the Line and I love Rocket Man, I sort of stuck to musical biopics, which have become this own thing inside the biopic genre at this point. You know, I think those two films specifically do a little bit different thing where it doesn't feel so sterilized by having like an estate behind it or a band member worried about how he's going to look on camera.
Yeah.
You know, I think so many of them are kind of sensitive about the subject matter they're dealing with, which doesn't always lend itself to the best true story.
Yeah, that's definitely the case for Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yes,
for sure.
You knew where I was steering the conversation.
Yeah, that is. I like Rami Malek. Don't get me wrong, but really, he won an Oscar for that? I'm not sure.
I'm never going to recover from that emotionally.
No. It's just frustrating because I remember watching it for the first time and we get through like the story of how, I can't remember the name of the song now, the famous one, it's gone. But when that happens, like the film stops and like starts again to something, you know, with the rest of the band or whatever. And it's just like, just doesn't feel right, you know, and just why like reconstruct like some of the like Live Aid stuff like shot for shot. I don't see the point in that. And not the best.
I have this weird thing with musical biopics where it's hard for me to get into them if I don't see the actor on screen singing the actual music, even though I know nobody's going to sound like Freddie Mercury, and I don't think Taron Egerton sounds exactly like Elton John. He does a fantastic job at what he's doing, but I appreciate that effort to try to do something. And it's
absolutely,
you know, seeing somebody lip sync a song doesn't do the same thing for me as seeing what those guys did. So Walk the Line, Rocket Man are pretty excellent.
Yeah, I do hope we get another like Freddie Mercury biopic. Along the line, I don't know whether that will happen, but I know like Sacha Baron Cohen had been trying to make this film for a long time, and it's just never happened for him because I think he would be a perfect Freddie Mercury for me.
Oh, and from what he said on a Howard Stern talk show years ago, is he wanted to like really go into the full debauchery of Freddie's life, and I think that would have been fascinating because Freddie was no saint, but I mean, I am a massive Queen fan, so I would have loved to see what he did, showing the truth that I don't think we necessarily got all of.
Yeah, and that's what's great about Rocket Man, because Elton John was just like, yeah, I was an asshole in my youth. Show me as an asshole. That's who I was.
Yes, he's an open book. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But this episode is, of course, dedicated to Dune Part 2 and Denis Villeneuve. So, Andrew, what is your choice for Denis Villeneuve films?
Okay, well, I ultimately went with Arrival, 2016's Arrival, but my initial plan, I do want to say I was originally going to go with 2010's Incendies. So hopefully anyone who's listening to this that's a future guest on Film v Film will do an Incendies episode for you, because it's a film I want to see covered, but few people have the chance to see it over here in the United States. It's not readily available on streaming, and so I thought I'd go with something a little more known. And I also think that the reason I wanted to go with Arrival most importantly is because it came the year after Sicario and sort of set Denis on this track of being this science fiction master that he's now become. And so I wanted to kind of deep dive into the origin of that.
Yeah, I hope we do, because I've not actually seen Incendies, so that would be a great one to do at some point. So I'm fascinated to see that one.
I promise you, the less you know about it going in, the better. It has one of the all-time great twists, I'll say.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool. So were there any other films in contention for you, or was it just those two?
Blade Runner 2049 was on the table. I wanted to avoid, I know you've covered a lot of Denis' work, and so I wanted to avoid covering too much. And I will say for the listener right now, I have not listened to your past episode on Arrival because I didn't want to be swayed in any direction. I didn't want to know what kind of scores you were going to come with. So we'll see. As soon as we're done recording this, I'll go back and listen so I can see if you were kind of on brand or if you've changed anywhere.
It's interesting because with that one, actually, I don't think Arrival was in the top 10 of that year in 2021. It's interesting with me, when I first watched it with my dad, it frustrated me. And I didn't fully understand the film. I don't know whether I missed some really important dialogue here and there, but from a film language, from a film narrative point of view, I didn't like it. And I felt it was too ambiguous at times. You know, I loved the film until like the last 20 minutes when we reveal what's revealed with that last question at the end. And I didn't agree with that last question at all. I was like, there's just no way she would say yes to this.
It's a fascinating conundrum of a question.
Yeah. The more I've watched this film, and especially for this podcast, the more I get what's going on here, and the ideas and the concepts here are kind of mind-boggling and just so incredibly well executed and so well done. It kind of blows my mind a bit of how daring and ambitious the ideas that this film is playing with, and you don't often get that in sci-fi. You get like great ideas and ambition, especially with like Akira that we've covered earlier this year, but with this, it just feels like different class in how it's written. It's quite extraordinary.
Did you see it in the theaters when it originally came out? I did not.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I wish I would have I wish I could go back and see it in a big screen, because I feel like the scope of it, as we'll talk about here shortly, I feel like it would have lended itself really well, because my first response to it wasn't love the way I now feel about it.
So what happens in Arrival?
Okay, well, I took your lead and I'm just pulling straight from IMDb. Figured it was nice and simple and clean.
Yeah.
Okay, so a linguist, played by Amy Adams, works with the military to communicate with alien life forms after 12 mysterious spacecraft appear around the world.
Excellent.
And that is the gist.
So directing then, for me, like the cinematography in this is great, especially during like the dark sequences. Like Bradford Young, the DP, is not kind of afraid to make these spaces look dark, even when it's light outside. Like, it looks great, especially the scene in the late evening where like Banks and Donnelly are like talking on the truck and you can hardly see the details on their faces. But at that time of day, you know, it would seem realistic. So it's beautifully shot at times for me.
Yeah, and I know Denis has said on record that he wanted the look of the film to feel like it was sort of a bad Tuesday, where it just got a little it got a little too rainy. And I'm sure you in the UK are well versed in rainy Tuesdays.
Yeah, I mean, it literally hasn't stopped raining for 2 fucking weeks at the moment. It's kind of miserable.
We're deep in winter here, so I'd prefer some rain to snow. But that's the look of the film. It doesn't feel like it's in the distant future. It feels like it could literally happen on a Tuesday, just randomly, you know. And I think that lends itself really well.
I think what's really interesting about this film, that this is a science fiction film, but for me, almost this is Denis Villeneuve's least visually inspiring film for me, even though it's science fiction. But I think that's the point of this film, that he's going into this with his crew writers, that let's make a sci-fi film that feels as realistic as possible. And obviously it's the nature of this film that we're kind of very much, there's a lot of news footage and obscuring news reports around the world, but we're mainly in this camp in Montana, and that's it. And obviously in these chambers on this Pebble alien ship. So and it is very minimalist, which is kind of a really interesting design choice. That there's little to no detail to the alien designs and the alien ships, extremely minimalist, which I think works really well because you don't have too. This is not a Guillermo del Toro film where there's detail everywhere you look. That's not that at all. But I think it's quite clever because the script is so strong and so much going on there. It makes the spherical like pictogram things pop out a lot more for me. So I think it's a really clever choice there with the design elements.
I think that's why when I initially saw it, it didn't hook me at
Right,
that particular point, is because it's so muted and it's it's really monochrome. It doesn't feel very vivid or bright. But like you said, that's sort of the point. Is it's kind of stripped back. It really wants to accentuate when there is light and when there is color. Mm-hmm. You're really drawn to it. Whereas most of the film is that muted tone, which again I think is important. And over time, I've come to really appreciate how intellectual this film is beyond your typical science fiction film or your typical film about an alien an alien invasion, which we'll talk about some inspiration to this film, but I think it really separates itself from almost everything else in the genre.
Yeah, there's no like spacecraft chase scene in this.
Right.
No way.
And even like what we do see on like the news footage of military and things, most of the actual like the violence or the war or stuff like that, it's all kind of tertiary and it's secondary to what's actually happening in front of you. And it's sort of breaking down what we as an audience have come to expect from a film like this, where you're expecting hostility and conflict. And there are characters obviously that are kind of like trying to steer you in that direction. But I like the way Denis sort of pulls the rug out from under the audience and what we should expect.
I love the sequence where we enter the ship for the first time. Like, it's really drawn out from when they arrive in their buggies. Like, there's like long shots of them just touching the outside of the ship. When they're inside, there's this great like long push-ins of the white light at the end of the ship. There's even like some very like subtle zoom-ins on the characters before they start walking. It just like racks up the sense of wonder and awe about this otherworldly place. There's some like great shots of them like upside down as they approach the glass. Which looks great, and it very much gives this again, you're kind of disorientated about where's level here, where's the horizon line. You're really not kind of sure with all the different angles. And then it ends up with this great like combination of sound design and score when the alien turns up at the glass. It is slightly scary actually the first time you watch it, especially in the cinema, if you had a chance to watch it in the cinema. Again, that scene in particular is the prime example of this Denis Villeneuve deliberate pace that I've been talking about, especially in part one. You very much have that here when they enter the ship for the first time.
Yeah, I'm glad I picked up on the same thing you did on the first time they're on board the spacecraft. It's really disorienting is the right word for it, and it messes with your perception of what's up, what's down, what's left, what's right.
Yeah.
And I know that Denis had challenges with trying to figure out the logistics of the nature of the spacecraft being really, really vertical versus how they were going to come in. And I think the way he solved that problem from a visual standpoint works really well for me, where I always felt like I understood the physics of it, even though he didn't have to kind of explicitly tell you. And I'm glad you also pointed to the score, because I think the score does several different things throughout the film that are fascinating at the beginning and the end, which are sort of bookended as the same thing. Most of the musical notes are really string heavy. It feels very human. It feels very emotional. And anytime they're on the spacecraft or interacting with the aliens, it's much more synth heavy. And it sort of gives you that feeling of off-world vibes. And you can kind of get the sense of what he and Hans went on to do with the Dune soundtrack, where it just feels totally otherworldly. Like what's happening on the spacecraft is not a sound your ears are accustomed to hearing. And I appreciated the way he kind of played with the composing and the sound design on those 2 points.
Yeah, we should mention the composer is Johan Johansson, who sadly passed away a few in like 2019, I think.
And he did Sicario too, and I think that shows
Yeah.
the range of his composing skills, is because these two films don't sound remotely like each other,
No.
and yet all of Denis' films do still have sort of a similar musical language, even though they're the spectrum's wide.
Yeah, I mean, in both scores, like they really stand out for me. That it's not drowned out by the ambiance of the whole film. It really has its own kind of language and its own character.
And unlike his colleague Chris Nolan, Denis is a little better about tweaking the sound mix to where you can hear characters talking around the sound of the music.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, he loves messing with people in terms of, like, was it Tenet and Interstellar when they're going up in the ship, like they're talking, like, yeah, I have no idea what you're saying right now.
Everything in Tenet is completely inaudible to me, and thank goodness I have kids and I'm forced to watch things in subtitles at really low volume, so I've gotten used to Nolan films on subtitles.
Right, yeah. I mean, I've watched Tenet a few times, still don't get it, frankly. Don't get it.
Yeah, and that's the point of that thing, I think.
Yeah, maybe.
I like to look at Tenet as it's Chris Nolan's sort of
The Big Sleep.
It's so, well, I almost look at it as it's his like proof of concept for a Bond film. He's sort of like, hey, if you want to see what I could do with a James Bond film, just watch the action and ignore the story, which makes no sense.
Yeah. I think the scene where, like, Louise is in the alien chamber feels kind of so different to all the scenes where Louise and Donnelly are in the antechamber outside the glass. Like, inside, the window looks really small and the aliens look really huge compared to the outside of the glass. Like, the floor is has this sharp texture to it, and it just feels even more like alien than before. The change in size of their perspective just adds to the whole mystery of the film in that scene as well. Because at that point in the film, you're still kind of trying to grasp with what's going on, and it kind of messes with you a little bit as well.
and that scene is so white and it's so bright, and that's the first time you really get that much color sort of both ends of the frame. And like you said, you're sort of your mind's trying to process what these aliens are and exactly how they look behind what you can actually see, and you assume they're one sort of scale size, and then in that scene you realize there's a whole different perspective to these creatures beyond what you have ever perceived up to that point. And I think that's a really clever decision, for him to kind of show. And he kind of hinted at it earlier in the film where they sort of sound like whales, or there's sort of this, it feels like it's this large ocean creature and you're only getting a small sense of it. But then in that particular scene, you finally see exactly how large these beings are.
Favorite shot for me, I mean, I don't have that many notes on directing for this film. A lot of it is like screenplay, to be honest.
Same here. Yes.
Yeah. But I think for me, I love how you really have to wait like a good 20 minutes before you really get to see what the alien ship looks like. And it's teased here and there in these news channels, but the shot that reveals the American ship in Montana is just kind of stunning as well. I mean, I said that the film isn't particularly visually inspiring, but like when he has the opportunity to do something cool, like he really goes for it in this particular scene. Like he has this like huge sweeping camera shot of the ship with this really low clouds in Montana, and we circle around the whole camp. That was beautiful for me.
You stole my thunder. That was I think when we get, like, if we go 100 years into the future and we look back on the pantheon of science fiction shots, I actually think that over time, this particular film is going to keep growing in stature. And I think that particular little, 60 to 120 seconds of footage is going to be something that stands out, because like you said, the clouds are rolling in. You can see how small their little helicopter is that they're coming in on with the size of the craft behind it. It's a masterwork of science fiction visual storytelling. And I know Denis has been in the news the last couple of days, talking about, his disdain for dialogue versus like visual storytelling. And we could debate that for hours, but I mean, like, I think that his ability to show things visually is really impressive to me. And that scene stands out. Yeah.
And it's kind of great as well, because I mean, the ship, as we said, there's not a lot of detail. It looks like a giant pebble you would find on a beach,
Right.
There's not a lot of detail there, and yet it kind of still feels awe-inspiring when you see it for the first time, even though they've kind of hidden this very basic shape for so long.
and just the idea that they're not fully rested on the ground is kind of it's alarming, because it's that wonder of like, are they here to do what you assume an alien life form might do in a different science fiction film, where they're going to be an aggressor, or are they a timid life form? It's an interesting concept to them to not actually touch ground.
So directing score for me, I don't think I'll go as high as Sicario. So, as I said, I think this is very much in the screenplay and the acting for me. But, I mean, it's still superbly done, so it still deserves to be in the 8s, but I'll go like an 8.
You're talking yourself into something higher?
Possibly. I'll go like an 8.5. Yeah.
Okay.
It's pretty solid. Yeah.
We're on the same page. I gave Sicario an 8.5 for directing, and I give this one an 8.5. I think that it's kind of a wash for me. They're very different in their what they require from Denis' standpoint. But I think he does a lot more with this film on a visual aspect than Sicario, which I think was a lot more of him and his interaction with the acting crew. So I think it took a different skill set, but it highlighted Denis' ability to be a man of many different things.
Yeah. Right. Screenplay then. So when they see like the circle images of communication from the aliens for the first time, like the film makes it very clear where the scientists and the military stand with this kangaroo story. Dr. Louise Banks explains to Weber, played by Forrest Whitaker, that in like the 17th century, when the colonialists met the Aborigines in Australia for the first time, and they saw like an animal run by, the colonists ask, what is that? And the Aborigines say kangaroo, which you assume is what they're called by the Aborigines, but it actually means I don't understand. Meaning Banks is telling Weber this is going to take a long time, even though that whole story was false that she reveals.
It's such a great reveal too, the way they string you out like that, and it feels like in this day and age of social media, we're all sort of like a little bit dumber to spotting truth from fiction. And it feels like that, that's such an interesting thing that you can very easily deceive someone with a well-told story.
Yeah. But Weber like reminds Banks that the Aborigines were nearly wiped out by a superior race, meaning they could kill us all before they understand each other. Like the tension between the scientists and the military get more and more tightly knotted as we watch the film. There's a great like element that feeds into this with some of the soldiers sneaking a bomb into the chamber, the antechamber, where the aliens are, Albert and Costello. So it's like the aliens are getting kind of frustrated too, as well as the scientists and military, in showing like Renner and Adams this big map of symbols before the explosion happens. Like, okay, so like they're saying this is going too slow for us too in this moment. Here's everything that you need to know. Go work it out before it's too late. So all of a sudden, there's pressure here to solve this situation coming from like the military guys and the aliens in one way.
Yeah, and also I picked up on the idea, and I think the whole idea of communication and miscommunication and language is so fascinating in this film, philosophically speaking, that there's 12 craft around the world. They're all being interacted with by different people in different languages with different objectives, and the challenges that presents, I think is really, really sophisticated storytelling without having to have these huge exposition dumps. The movie kind of washes over you, and it's why I think you and I are both kind of on the same page, where the more I watch it, the more I love it, and the more I appreciate the subtle nature of it.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I watched this, I felt like I was the only one in the universe that didn't really like it. And I was like, what? Why is Arrival so good? But I think this film has so much rewatch value that it gets better with every watch.
Yeah, it's kind of opposite of Interstellar for me, which I love. Listen, I love Interstellar, but man, that last act makes no sense, and it can be like almost too high concept for some audiences.
Yeah, I totally understand what you mean, because I think with Interstellar, I struggle with how Jessica Chastain gets to the point where she's like, oh, it's the watch. I'm like, where's your motivation there? There's not enough in the storytelling to like, oh yeah, all the data is coming from the ticking of in the watch. Anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting. These two great sci-fi directors, have done very different things. And I think Denis' sophistication really shows in this one.
Yeah. The dream sequence is really interesting, where Donnelly is saying that if you immerse yourself into another language, you're rewriting your brain. And it's the point where we begin to understand what's happening with Louise to some level. And on my first couple of watches, I struggled with the narrative storytelling in how is the film telling us that Louise has gained these powers of seeing her whole future. Like, how can she see her own future? Even when she enters the chamber with the aliens, I thought this absorption of this power, like, is surely happening here in this moment. But it doesn't. It's just a conversation between a human and an alien. But I realized that the power Louise has is the alien language itself. She's learnt it. Like, the alien language can see all of time in a loop or a circle, as their pictographs kind of show visually, that we see in their symbols. So what sort of threw me off the first time, and certainly throws the military guys off, is that the aliens' gift of their language has been misinterpreted as the word weapon, where in fact the aliens are trying to like say the word language itself. That's how, like, I read it anyway. It's such a huge and powerful concept that it's very difficult to like grasp. Certainly for me, I don't know if I'm just a dummy and I've just got to watch this several times, but that's how I'm kind of reading it. But I think the film executes it extremely well once you've watched it a few times without fully explaining it. I think that's the key. It's, as you said, there's not massive information dumps. It's so perfectly crafted in how we reveal all these certain bits of information, and that specific thing where language is the key here is so fascinating to me, that this is the thing that's getting misinterpreted is the word itself.
Yeah, and it feels, even though it's obviously a story about humanity and an alien life form, it feels like a larger allegory for just the idea of globally our ability to interact or have a time interacting with each other because of language barriers and communication. It feels like the very concept of the film is larger than just the narrative story that you're seeing on screen. And when Jeremy Renner mentions to her, he's like, "Are you dreaming in their language now?" That line stood out to me as a really fascinating thing. There's so many questions that the film has. There are so many questions I have for the film that aren't fully answered. And in some scenarios that might bother me, but I feel like in this one, it's intentional, and it's because he wants you to have these thought-provoking conversations with yourself after watching the film, which I still do.
I think one really fascinating thing I noticed is how like Louise can literally communicate or remember her present and her future at the same time. Like when the daughter asks about what happens when two sides end up happy, Louise says, "Ask your father." Then there's like a scene about what they should do next about the China situation, that they should, do a trade. Donnelly says it's a non-zero sum game. Then in the very next shot, in a flash forward, but we think it's a flashback at the time, with her daughter saying the same thing, it's a non-zero sum game, which definitely suggests she can see her own future in this moment. And it's confirmed that she can see her future when we see this cylinder capsule come down from the ship, but Louise is still inside the tent. There are no windows there that I could see. And then she goes outside. The cylinder then actually comes out again, and we actually see it come out from the ship this time. Plus, we also get a shot of her hands with the ink inside the alien chamber. And we have to actually wait a good 5 minutes before we see that shot again when she's having that conversation with the alien. Costello, I believe. So it's amazing editing to slowly reveal what's going on with these time flashes that actually turn out to be flash forwards.
Yeah, I thought the editing in Sicario was really strong if we're comparing the two sort of juxtaposed side by side. But the editing in this is so superior to what I think Sicario did really well, because again, you're piecing the puzzle together as the film's happening, and I think they make a lot of smart choices in terms of what they're showing you and when. And then it's one of those things, much like I'm going to talk about Nolan again, but much like Memento, where it's one of those films where you go back and you go, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense there because of this. The second watch lends itself. I think Arrival's in the same boat, where every time I go back, I piece another puzzle piece together, and I find a little stronger connection to the story.
Yeah, it's interesting, that comparison, because like Memento, that's very much, you've got like, I haven't seen it for a while, but you've got two stories going on. Like you've got like the black and white stuff, and you've got like the present day stuff, and it's all being played out backwards.
Mm-hmm.
But I think here, like your perception, you think to begin with that they are flashbacks. That whole scene at the beginning of this film, you assume is flashbacks, but in fact they are flash forwards. So it's just interesting how Denis slowly reveals that fact that they're not flashbacks at all, they're flash forwards. And it's just a really interesting balance that he strikes in the storytelling and the editing of how he reveals that, because I mean there are some occasions where you think, are these actually just dream sequences, because we have moments where the dialogue in the flash forwards that's mixed into the present day stuff in Montana, which I think is really clever as well in like weeding out that reveal that they're flash forwards.
There's that one scene where Amy Adams' character is sitting on a bench or a bed or whatever, and she looks up, she sort of hears dialogue happening, and she's kind of semi with it, and then she looks up and she sees one of Abbott or Costello. She sees one of them kind of right in front of her, and then it cuts away, and it's sort of revealed that she's effectively daydreaming at that point.
Yeah.
So I think there's some really clever choices there with, she doesn't quite fully understand what's happening to her in real time, and we as the audience are also discovering this at the same point in time, which again, I think Denis, much like Sicario, he's really smart with how he uses POV and what he shows the audience and when.
So the end is absolutely fascinating to me, where Louise says, well, believe it or not, I know something that's going on, that's going to happen. I can't explain how I know, I just do. And when I told your daddy, he got really mad, and he said I made the wrong choice. She's referring to the fact that Hannah, her daughter, will die of a rare disease. The fact that we learn she can see her future does suggest that Louise does have a choice here. And at the end of the film, Donnelly asks her in their near future, do you want to make a baby? And she says yes. That's the big moral question that's asked at the end of this film. And if you know your child will die, would you still decide to have a baby with Renner's character? And I personally wouldn't say yes. That's probably because I'm not a parent. That might be different for you, Andrew. But what's so incredible about this script is that the conclusion of what the alien gift is that you can see all of time, but is this actually more of a weapon because it's opening up a huge moral question like this for humans? It's so fascinating. Is this gift too big for humans to handle? Do you get what I'm saying there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we too dumb as a species to have this incredible tool at our disposal?
Yeah.
It's like, what, again, the film's sort of illustrating throughout it how hard it is for us to come together as a collective for anything, that the idea of us getting such a grand tool in this language surely lends itself to problems that we don't see that, end up probably happening in the timeline. I am glad that you mentioned sort of the moral question. My wife and I had a deep philosophical conversation yesterday about it, because it's, as a parent, it's tough. I don't, when I saw this film in 2016, I didn't have any children at the time. And so I was pretty much in the same boat you were, in terms of, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable saying that I could go along with the decision that Louise makes. Now, as I near 40 and I've got two young children, I don't know. It's a tougher question that is hard to answer. And what I also find really fascinating is apparently in the novella that this is based on, the daughter dies in a car accident versus having an illness. And I think that's an even darker choice to be made, because then you sort of, Louise sort of knows when her daughter's going to die and how. And then the idea of how, prevention versus acceptance of fate, that's a whole different philosophical question that, is really hard to wrestle with.
Yeah, I think what's maybe a criticism with the film is that I don't know whether the film makes it entirely clear, whether it's too ambiguous, whether she does have a choice or whether she can change her future. So I think maybe that's an interesting change up from the novella to the film, that like if she decides to have a baby, which it seems like she does, then there is no differences in her life that can stop her from dying because it's a disease, whereas in the novella, it's a car accident, so don't go out driving that day, simple as that, or something. But it's just incredible, this film, the fact that you've built up nearly 2 hours of storytelling, that the aliens have given humans this incredible gift of language, and it's just a great way of how they kind of simplify it as well, with the daughter's name in Hannah, is that you can spell Hannah forwards and back, kind of thing. I'm not explaining that very well, but this language can make humans see all of time, and we grasp that aspect, and it stops conflict with the Chinese at the end. And yet you are immediately hit with the biggest moral conundrum that humans could face, I think, one of them anyway, at the end. If you have this ability, if we learn this language, well then, okay, here you go then. Right. Deal with that. This is your gift.
Yeah, I also love that it feels like this is sort of the child of Spielberg's Close Encounters or E.T., where it just feels like Denis asking different questions about science fiction material than a lot of the other contemporaries are, in terms of, like I said, conflict is not something that is remotely present in this film in terms of the way the aliens are interacting with us as humans. We are the aggressors. We are sort of in the more villainous, dangerous situation to them, and their outreach to us to save them in the future is just so fascinating. It's no surprise that Denis obviously been hugely influenced by Spielberg over his career.
Yeah.
And I think this feels like a spiritual child to those films of the 80s.
Yeah, that's a really great point as well, is that it feels certainly the inspiration from Spielberg to this film, with the fact that you're talking about that the aliens are coming here to help us, but they're giving us a gift that might be too powerful for us to handle, which I think is just a great idea, and just like poof, blows my mind really, that maybe is this a mistake? I mean, there is an argument to say that is this actually a mistake from the aliens?
Yeah, right.
Is this too much?
Yeah, or maybe they're only, at the end of the day, maybe they're only here to serve themselves in saving their own species, and they sort of look at us as ancillary to their own existence. That's a whole other layer of level to this. We're pawns in the whole scheme of things,
Yeah. So interesting lines then. A simple one: coffee with some aliens, from Donnelly. That was a fun one. Like near the beginning, a guy throws a yellow glow stick in the antechamber of the alien ship, and Renner says, "Yeah, that just happened." Where the gravity changes. That was good.
Yeah, I think literally the first line of dialogue in the whole film is "memory is a strange thing," which Amy Adams says right out of the gate, and so immediately that's your first clue, sort of at where the film's going. She's got a ton of kind of moments of levity throughout the film that sort of break up some of the monotony, if you will. When she first comes out of her trip in the spacecraft, she says, "Am I fired?" And the CIA agent says, "You're better than the last guy." I thought that was kind of funny, because she'd just seen the last guy get carted out, and clearly couldn't handle the physicality of it. And then later in the film, when she's clearly frustrated because Jeremy Renner's finally cracked the code of the 1 of 12, she's trying to get through to these sort of bureaucrats, and she can't get through, and she just says, why do I have to talk to him? Like, she's so desperate to talk to somebody who will listen and accept. So there's a couple of lines of dialogue that I thought were really interesting that just added a little bit of levity to what's otherwise a really heavy film.
Yeah, I love the opening line of this film, which basically kind of sums up the film as a whole, from Amy Adams, where she says, I used to think this was the beginning of our story.
That's a great one, yeah.
Yeah. But I think my favorite is towards the end, where she says, I've had my head tilted up. I think it's Renner, actually. I've had my head tilted up to the stars for as long as I can remember. What surprised me the most, it wasn't meeting them, it was meeting you. I just love this line from Renner as Ian, and I'm a big softie at heart, so I think he is as well. And if you just notice, there's a lot of tilt down shots in the movie, which feels really kind of poetic as well. So yeah, that's a great one for me.
And we didn't even touch upon, I think, what's probably become the most iconic line of the film that I've seen the most frequently, and that's when she first puts her hand up to the glass and the alien does, and she said, now that's a proper introduction.
Yeah.
That's sort of this great, grand, awe-inspiring moment that I think will hold up really well over time.
Yeah. And I really like the decision as well when Amy Adams goes into their chamber, in this white chamber for the first time, and we've got to a point where it's established that she knows the language. So I just love the fact that we just have a simple thing where the aliens' dialogue is subtitled now when they put up their spherical symbols. So I just like that was quite a good point in the film where, we don't need to go through the rigmarole of trying to figure out what they're saying. We've got to that point now. We can use subtitles. We've earned this.
Yes, absolutely.
So screenplay score for me, I fucking love this, to be honest now. I just love the ambition of this story, and you think that you've grasped the concept of where this film is going, and then it hits you with this moral conundrum that, well, hang on, this gift isn't as what it seems. Like, we're being shown a moral conundrum that's so huge that, is this a good thing in the first place? So I just love that it kind of hits you around the face a little bit there, that you think you know this film going into the last 10 minutes, but you're like, oh shit, maybe not. So I'm going to go pretty strong, and I like a 9.8 for me.
Okay, wow. I'm not quite as high as that. I went 9.5.
Right.
I was kind of I knew I was in the 9 somewhere, and I kind of, the last watch last night got me all the way up to 9.5 because, like you, I think it's so sophisticated, it's so intelligent, it does so many different things than anything else in science fiction in the 21st century that I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah. Unlike some of the contemporaries of Denis, where you can kind of pick plot holes through things. I think this thing's really tight. It's well thought out. It's executed really well. No issues with the screenplay for me at all.
And this is well under 2 hours, which kind of blows my mind, frankly. I feel like if you're going to make this film today with a different filmmaker, this would easily be 2.5 hours.
Oh, without question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In these days where editors don't really
edit
do much. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, you still have this very deliberate pace that Denis Villeneuve goes with. It's just quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, he knows every single thing he's going to do meticulously. He knows where he's going to get you. He has so much. He has so much skill in the editing room. What to take out, what to leave in. Mastery of directing and editing.
Yeah, I just feel like if you take out 1 or 2 shots in this, the whole script could fall apart. To be honest,
correct. Right.
Yeah. So acting then, I did like the little bits of humor in this film where Dr. Banks and Donnelly enter the ship for the first time. The gravity is different in the ship. Banks is really nervous, and Forrest Whitaker's character, Colonel Weber, says to her, you can do this. She just gets even more nervous and is like, then Weber is like, screw it, and grabs her and takes her up. Then Donnelly tries to jump himself and just lands on his face, which I think is quite funny, especially as he's in this like they're all in this big like orange hazmat suit. So it's just really interesting. I think you mentioned earlier that, there are little bits of levity here. Not a lot, but when they do happen, it's not laugh out loud, and I don't think that would be appropriate for this type of film. But, it's interesting to just break up a little bit of the tension here.
Yeah, I think Denis does. There are similar moments in Sicario, whether it's just a Josh Brolin smirk or whatever, but Denis just knows how to slightly dial back the tension in specific moments so that he can ratchet it up maybe a moment or two after, and I think Arrival does it really well. My only issue with the acting in Arrival is I don't think that there's just not a big enough cast where Adams does a lot. I think Amy Adams, in hindsight, clearly should have been Oscar nominated that year. No idea how she didn't get nominated.
Really?
Jeremy Renner's terrific, but there's just not a lot of other actors doing a lot of stuff because it's so forward with the two leads. That I think that's my only criticism with the film is there's just not enough other characters to bump the acting up. But they don't necessarily need additional characters, if that makes sense. I think Adams carries the film pretty singularly.
Yeah, I can't see where you would add and gain anything by having another character in there, to be honest.
Like it's kind of necessary for this film to have the acting be more subdued and be a little more internalized, I think is important to the film for me. So I think it's not a showy film. The acting's not going to be something that you look at and go, oh wow, it's really flashy in front of your eyes. But I think it's important in what it does. But I think there's other aspects to the film that are more crucial personally.
Yeah. And also, as you say, like the acting is kind of very subdued at times, and there is some melancholic aspects here with like the romance between Renner and Amy Adams. Like you don't know it as you watch it, but like on rewatches, you notice that more, that their chemistry has some romance to it. Not much really, but it's there.
Mm-hmm.
I found like Amy Adams' performance so finely judged when we see her at this party celebration scene promoting her new book. In this flash that when we watch it, we know it's a flash forward at this point, and the Chinese president is there, and he's so pleased to see her and says, we wouldn't have solved this situation without you, because she told him his wife's dying words, which is how the Chinese learn that the aliens, that their weapon is actually their language that can see all of time, etc. But Amy Adams' performance is so crucial here because she's playing like Louise in the future, sort of remembering what's happened, but also giving us enough access to be in the present moment for her, for us to work out what's going on in the present scenes in Montana. So it's almost as if she has to be in two places at once emotionally when we're watching. So it's I feel like this scene is so crucial for this film to work, and I think she does an incredible job here. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, again, Denis, his ability to really sensitively look at female characters, I think is really, it's not normal with a lot of male directors these days where they can understand the nuance and the subtleties of strong female characters, and Denis got a long track record of doing it. And I think the beauty of this film is all of the other actors are sort of at a distance in terms of their showiness, because you need Amy to be front and center. Like you said, she's trying to pull off a lot of different elements of her character in the timeline in quick succession. And again, it still just baffles me that she wasn't Oscar nominated. It's one of her great roles, and she's one of our great actresses currently working. So it's a spellbinding performance from her.
Yeah. But I mean, that scene specifically is so important, I think, just from a storytelling point of view, to know where we are emotionally, because, she's remembering in the future. It was like, oh yeah, I did save the world or whatever. But through the narrative, we're more in the present. In Montana, we're going back and forth a lot, and certainly both scenes have to be distinctive, but not too much. So we're not alienating the audience of what's actually going on, because obviously the crucial information is happening in the future.
Yeah, and I do think it was smart in terms of like having an actor like Forrest Whitaker in a small but important role. I think adds gravitas. When you see him on screen, you know he's an Oscar-winning actor. He's a fantastic performer. So I think Denis is really smart in this film. Unlike some of his other films where I think there's a lot of an all-star cast, Prisoners, Sicario, etc. This one's got fewer actors, but he knows when the right moment is to bring in someone that adds a real a real gravitas to the situation.
Yeah, I think Forrest Whitaker is pretty incredible in this as well, because like that first meeting when he comes to the university, there's clear tension between the two actors right from the off for me. And there's varying scenes where you think he's warming to her and she's warming to him, but then in the next scene, like, you know, their differences certainly show up in how they want to get the results. And because of the nature of this story, that it's going to take time to work out this language, their performances really come to the fore in the frustrations of Amy Adams wanting more time to figure this language out, and Whitaker saying, we're running out of time, we need results. And yet they both really respect each other compared to some of the other bureaucrats and soldiers that are very much set in their ways of how they feel about this situation.
Yeah, and I'd be hard pressed to think of another female currently working today that could have done as well as Amy did in this role. I just think it's so suited to her and what makes her a really special actress. Maybe somebody else could have done the Jeremy Renner role. I think he's very good in it, but again, this is an Amy Adams piece for me.
Yeah. I mean, in that last like montage sequence, Jeremy Renner and Amy Adams are pretty amazing, and you feel this very like tender love for each other in a very like subtle way in all the time periods that we're shown in this little sequence, especially in the present when they hug on this Jeep. And the music certainly helps a lot. The music is, as we said, is really beautiful in the end and echoes the beginning.
You can tell they have a lot of comfort with each other off screen. That's very obvious that they are friendly. And so, yes, I think their chemistry together makes what could feel like a kind of a clunky romance. It doesn't feel that way in this film because those two have great chemistry.
Favorite performance for you, Andrew? Silly question.
Got to be Amy. I mean, maybe Abbott, but
yeah, Costello possibly.
Yeah. No, this is an Amy Adams piece. It's going to be like on her Mount Rushmore. No matter how many more decades she's working, this is right up there for her.
I feel like she's gone missing in recent years. I'm like, I want to see an Amy Adams film soon. I'm like, surely there's one in the pipeline somewhere.
Yeah, because she was on a run for a while there where it felt like year after year she was, at the Oscar ceremonies, at every award recognition, she was front and center.
Yeah, and somehow still losing.
Right.
Yeah. I'm going Amy Adams as well. She is remarkable. Acting score for me, I think it's still pretty solid. I get your kind of comment about that there's not many actors in this film, but I kind of just do love the fact that this feels like a very internal piece. The fact that it is kind of just pretty much set in this one location. Yes, there's lots of news footage, and there are little scenes where we go to the other countries, but it's mainly just in Montana with these main characters. So yeah, I mean, I love a bit of subtlety in my movie going. So I'm going to go like a solid 9 for me.
Okay. I had a feeling I was going to be a little under you on this one. I went 8.4. It's not that I think it's not a bad acting performance, and I think most of that 8.4 is Amy Adams doing brilliant work. I think that there's other components of the film that every time I go back and I rewatch, I think of conceptual things more than I just think about acting. Where on the flip side, on the Sicario performances for me, that's acting driven. This one's just got a little different tone to it. So I feel confident with 8.4 still being a strong score.
Yeah, I think you are right. Maybe I'm more of a romantic. I don't know, but I think certainly this is very screenplay heavy compared to the directing and the acting. Whereas I think with Sicario, it's great across the board with the three elements that we look at on this podcast. Right, let's add up the scores then for Arrival.
So I think it's safe to assume your Arrival score will go up from your previous episode.
Yes.
I'm definitely looking forward to going back and listening to that.
Yep. Arrival gets a very strong score of 53.7. So Arrival wins this one over Sicario with 52.4. A lot tighter than I imagined. But
I have them both very high on. I'm an insane person and have a top 500 favorite movies of all time, and they're both very close to each other.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. That would take way too much of my time.
It took some time
to really do it well. Yeah,
I will say, before you and I did this recording, I threw some stuff up on our social media, kind of getting a gauge, getting a temp check from the audience, and Arrival tended to be what most people chose over these two films. A lot of people just found the nuance, the sophistication, the intelligence of the film to stand out for them.
Yeah. So next week we are doing a Legends episode. They are returning, so we will be talking about the legendary actress that is Julia Roberts. So we'll be having a look at her movies, and I'll have a guest, Claire, a returning guest from Why the Flick. So check that one out. It should be very exciting. And I'll tell you now, we have recorded that already, and I'm going for one of my guilty pleasures.
Oh, okay. We know you're a romantic now, so
yeah.
I'm curious what you're going to pick.
Yeah. Andrew, you have an amazing... this is your opportunity again to talk about your podcast, and where can we find you?
Yeah, so first off, again, want to thank you for offering this guest spot. It's been a pleasure to be here. Love all your back catalog. Anyone listening, go back and check out all Martin's stuff. Tons of great stuff back there. But if you want to find me and my co-host Adam over at the Revisionist Almanac, the big tongue twister, we look back on past Oscar ceremonies and we just look at what won. We decide what we think should have won. And then again, we empower the audience to vote and decide what actually deserved to win past Oscar ceremonies. And those winners go into the Revisionist Almanac. You can find us on all your social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Letterboxd, etc. We're at Rev Almanac.
Excellent stuff. And now, unfortunately, guys, it's time to say goodbye. I know it's very sad. Right, it's goodbye from Andrew. Bye-bye.
And I'm not going to ruin this. Goodbye.
Yes, you'll be very surprised to know people get so stumped by that question. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
And it's goodbye from me. I am going to watch Dune, the first one, and then Dune Part Two many times at the cinema. Bye-bye. That's it for Part 2. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out Part 1 if you haven't done so already. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell me what your favourite films are relating to the episodes. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast, for X at FVF_podcast. Plus, we are now on YouTube, so hit that like button and comment there. If you do, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off.